In the dark of night, a servant discovers a scene straight out of a nightmare. Blood is everywhere. Clara Harris lies dead on the floor, stabbed to death. And nearby, her husband, barely clinging to life, still clutching the knife he used to kill her and tried to kill himself. But this brutal tragedy, it all began 18 years earlier in the presidential box at Ford's Theater on the night Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. But first, if you're a fan of profound, historic, and timeless stories told in captivating detail, that's what we do here. Welcome to HEATHSTORY. We upload twice a week, so if that sounds good, be sure to like and subscribe. Now here's today's story. It was April 14th, 1865. The Civil War was over, but the wounds, physical, emotional, and national, were still very fresh. Families all across the country mourned their dead, towns rebuilt from ash, and a nation began the slow, very painful process of reuniting. At the center of it all stood President Abraham Lincoln. His shoulders bore the weight of a divided nation. His face, lined from years of anguish, showed the toll of war, but also a glimmer of hope. On this day, Lincoln decided to celebrate to allow himself a rare moment of joy. That evening, the president and his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, planned to attend a performance of Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater. And by their side would be a young couple, Clara Harris and Major Henry Rathbone. Clara was a beacon of grace and compassion. As the daughter of New York Senator Ira Harris, she could have chosen a life of leisure. Instead, she spent the war tending to wounded soldiers in makeshift hospitals, witnessing pain and death up close. Her fiancé, Henry Rathbone, was cut from a similar cloth, a decorated Union officer, disciplined, brave, steadfast. Together, they were seen as a symbol of the nation's resilience and hope for the future. Clara had also developed a close bond with Mary Todd Lincoln during the war. The two women, both navigating personal loss and national turmoil, became confidants. They found solace in shared grief and a mutual determination to carry on. Clara's presence brought comfort to Mary in some of her darkest moments, and by April 1865, they had become dear friends. When Clara and Henry accepted the Lincolns' invitation, they felt on top of the world. It was a moment of victory, a symbol of their bright future full of possibility. Ford's Theater was electric that night. The orchestra struck up Hail to the Chief as the president entered, and the packed house erupted in applause. All eyes were on the presidential party as they took their seats in the private box above the stage. Clara, radiant in her white satin gown, and Henry, handsome in his military uniform, followed the Lincolns into the box, waving graciously to the cheering crowd. But not everyone in that theater was there to celebrate. In the shadows, a man plotted. A man who, if noticed, would likely have been greeted with smiles and handshakes. John Wilkes Booth wasn't just any man. He was one of the most famous actors of his day. His face was as familiar as a movie star's would be for us today. That fame allowed him to slip through the theater unnoticed. No one questioned his presence. Why would they? Booth had spent weeks planning this moment. A fervent Confederate sympathizer, he had been enraged by Lincoln's recent proposal to grant voting rights to black Union veterans. To Booth, it was the ultimate betrayal. And tonight, the actor was determined to put on the act of his life. The play reached its comedic peak. Laughter filled the air, echoing through the Grand Theater, and then, boom! A single gunshot shattered the moment. The crowd froze in stunned silence. Clara turned to see President Lincoln slump forward in his chair, blood pouring from the back of his head. Booth, standing just feet away, held a .44 caliber Derringer pistol, smoke still curling from its barrel. Before anyone could react, Henry Rathbone lunged at Booth, grabbing him in a desperate attempt to stop his escape. But Booth was ready. With his other hand, he drew a knife and slashed Henry's arm, leaving a deep, gaping wound. Despite the pain, Henry held on, grappling with Booth until the assassin broke free. Booth leapt into the stage below, shouting, "Sic semper tyrannis, thus always to tyrants." The audience watched in stunned horror as he fled the theater, disappearing into the night. The scene inside the presidential box was complete chaos. Clara, frozen with shock, was covered in blood, Lincoln's and Henry's. The laughter of the crowd had given way to cries of panic. Lincoln, gravely wounded, was carried across the street to Peterson House. Clara and Henry followed, still wearing their blood-soaked clothes. Clara stayed by Mary Todd Lincoln's side throughout the night, comforting her as best she could. But there was nothing anyone could do. Early the next morning, Abraham Lincoln was pronounced dead. He now belonged to the ages. The nation mourned, but for Clara and Henry, the nightmare was just beginning. 2 years after that fateful night, Clara and Henry married. They tried to move forward, raising 3 children together. But the events of April 14, 1865 cast a very long shadow. Henry was never the same. His physical wound healed, but his mind deteriorated. Nightmares of the assassination plagued him. He became paranoid, particularly toward Clara, accusing her of infidelity. His once bright military career faltered as he spiraled into depression and irrational behavior. Desperate for relief, the family moved to Hanover, Germany in 1882, where Henry had been appointed U.S. consul. But the move only made things worse. Henry's paranoia consumed him. He wandered the house late at night, pacing the halls with wild eyes, muttering about conspiracies and imagined betrayals. Shadows seemed to grow longer in their once bright home. Servants whispered about his increasingly erratic behavior, and Clara, once a beacon of strength, began to feel trapped like a prisoner in her own life. She confided in close friends, admitting that she feared for her safety, but she stayed. Bound by duty, bound by love, bound by a glimmer of hope that maybe, somehow, things would get better. By December 1883, hope was fading fast. The tension in the house was suffocating. Every word felt like a spark near a powder keg ready to ignite at any moment. On the evening of December 23rd, neighbors later reported hearing raised voices, angry accusations, and then screaming. Inside the house, Henry snapped. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a knife from a nearby table. His eyes burned with fury as he lunged at Clara. His first strike was wild, slashing across her shoulder, but then he struck again and again, each thrust of the blade more vicious than the last. Clara tried to shield herself, her screams echoing through the house, but Henry's attack was relentless. He stabbed her repeatedly in the chest and the neck until she collapsed onto the floor. Blood pooled around her lifeless body, soaking the floorboards beneath her. The house fell into a stunned silence. Breathing heavily, Henry stood over Clara's body, the bloody knife trembling in his hand. For a fleeting moment, he seemed to realize the horror of what he had done. His eyes darted around the room in panic. Then, in a final act of desperation, he turned that knife on himself. With both hands, he plunged it deep into his chest, trying to end his own life. But he missed his heart. The wound was deep, but it was not fatal. Servants, drawn by the screams, rushed into the room moments later. What they found would haunt them forever. Clara lay motionless on the floor, her once beautiful white gown stained crimson. Nearby, Henry slumped against the wall, barely clinging to life, blood pouring from the wound in his chest. Their young children, terrified and confused, were quickly ushered away from the horror before them. Clara was gone. Henry miraculously survived, but the man he once was had died long before that night. German authorities declared him criminally insane, and for the rest of his life he would stare at the blank walls in an asylum. He died in 1911, broken mentally and physically. But even in death, their tragedy continued. Their graves in Germany were disinterred in 1952 due to cemetery policies. Unvisited and forgotten for decades, their remains were discarded without ceremony. A final heartbreaking chapter in a life marked by sorrow. Despite the personal tragedies that marked his early life, not all was lost for Henry Riggs Rathbone, Clara and Henry's eldest son. Raised by an uncle after the loss of his parents, he returned to the United States with his siblings and carved out his own path. Henry Riggs went on to serve 2 terms as a U.S. congressman representing the land of Lincoln, Illinois. In the early 1900s, he toured the country, sharing the story of what happened to his parents on the night of Abraham Lincoln's assassination. Through his efforts, their memory and the Rathbone name found a place in history, ensuring they would not be entirely forgotten. Clara Harris went to Ford's Theater expecting an evening of joy, but she became forever entangled with one of history's darkest nights. Her story, like that of the man she sat beside, is marked by violence, loss, and an enduring question: how deeply can one night ripple through a lifetime?
New Heath Story episodes drop twice a week only on the Jim Heath channel. If you'd like to help keep Heath Story going, consider supporting us on Patreon.